In today's video, we're going to explore 7 factors that could destroy Russia's military might. These factors are not just why the Russian military is struggling in the current conflict, but also the deep-seated weaknesses that could lead to its complete collapse. From systemic and tactical issues to strategic and logistical challenges, join me as I explore the biggest weaknesses in the Russian military and why they could be disastrous for the country's military might. Don't look away. You won't want to miss this analysis. Illusion of power. The explanation is simple. It's all about appearances. Many people view the Russian military as the successor to the Soviet war machine, a force of sheer numbers and unyielding might. Remember, the Soviet Union was the one to spend over 20% of its gross domestic product, GDP, during the Cold War era to keep up with the image of a military colossus that could crush any adversary through sheer attrition and brutal efficiency. But appearances can be deceiving, and as the vestige of the Soviet legacy, Russia inherited more than just the image. It also inherited the underlying weaknesses. The weakness has now been exposed for the world to see as the brittle core of the Russian military, previously masked by hollow bravado, cracked and crumbled when put to the test in Ukraine. So let's inspect each of these cracks that have caused the facade of the Russian military to crumble under the weight of its overestimation. The first crack is arguably the most obvious: heavy loss. The Russian military has simply lost too many troops in Ukraine, weakening the very fiber of its operational readiness. According to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, Russia has lost as many as 5,400 troops between February 24, 2022 and July 16, 2024. That's more than 500,000 soldiers in a little over 2 years. The last time such devastating losses were seen was during World War II, when nations mobilized on an unprecedented scale. But in June 2024, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said that almost 700,000 Russian troops were fighting in Ukraine. So how weak can the Russian military possibly be, even after all these heavy losses? Well, first of all, does anyone believe Putin's claims anymore after they've been proven wrong time and again? But for argument's sake, let's say those figures aren't grossly overestimated. This begs the question, where are all these troops coming from? Because the Russian military casualties are very much real, and the country's armed forces comprised roughly 900,000 troops and officers before the invasion. So something doesn't add up. The element missing in this calculation is conscription, the issue of military service and conscription. In August 2022, Putin signed the decree to increase the number of Russian troops by 7,000. In December 2023, he ordered another 17,000 fighters to be added. If Sergei Shoigu, the now sacked long-standing Minister of Defense, is to be believed, almost 49,000 contract soldiers and volunteers joined the army in 2023 alone. Though he presents these figures through a lens of heroism and dedication, they probably have more to do with the generous pay and benefits offered to attract recruits. Namely, it's been reported that the Russian contract troops are paid at least 21,000 rubles per month, approximately $2,300, to fight Putin's war. That's over 3 times more than the average Russian salary, which was 7,149 rubles in July 2023. So, Russia may have the numbers when it comes to troops, but as you'll soon learn, numbers are all the country has. You see, many of the Russian military's most elite personnel perished in the opening weeks of the full-scale conflict in Ukraine. The new conscripts can in no way replace the expertise and battle-hardened experience of those troops, especially not when they're only conscripted for a year, most of which they spend in training. However, the more troops lost their lives in Ukraine, the shorter this training period and the more desperate Russian mobilization efforts became. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW for short, reported that Russia even tried to draft new troops inside Ukraine by conducting a door-to-door mobilization effect in Kadivka and forcing residents of Luhansk into joining the military through extortion and threats. And that's on top of the 100,000 dangerous prison inmates Russia freed to fight in Ukraine and the many ill-prepared draftees in Putin's partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists. Drafting these reservists was such a huge mistake that even Putin admitted to it during a video call with his advisors, expressing his regret for drafting individuals with chronic illnesses, people too old to fight, and fathers with children. But this regret will do little to mitigate the severe consequences of such hasty and flawed mobilization efforts and appease the growing discontent within Russian troops, especially as it's becoming more evident that Russia still treats its troops as the Soviet Union treated the T-34 tank during World War II, as expendable assets. The T-34 was cheap to build, which allowed the Red Army to mass-produce them and send them to be destroyed. Similarly, Russia continues to send its soldiers into harm's way without any regard for their safety, seeing them as nothing more than pawns. In both cases, it seems that the prevailing sentiment was and is, hey, we can always get some more. As you can expect, this willingness to sacrifice Russian lives and conduct attrition warfare at a cost no Western country would ever accept hasn't made the Russian troops fond of their service of their mission. This brings us to the second crack in the facade of the Russian military, the exceedingly low morale fueled by a sense of expendability, the outright horrific treatment by the government, and the grim realities of war. Ineffective strategy. In August 2023, a small group of Russian soldiers stationed in the Kherson region recorded a video in which they described their morale as being below floor level. According to the independent media organization translating war materials into English, War Translated, which shared and translated the video, these soldiers complained about being sent to the first line of defense without proper training, air support, artillery support, and heavy equipment. This video is on par with the November 2022 assessment by the ISW, which indicated that the morale and psychological state of Russian forces in the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts were exceedingly low due to high losses on the battlefield, troop desertion, and inadequate preparation for battle. All things considered, it shouldn't be surprising that the abuse of methamphetamines and other drugs is on the rise among the Russian military, according to Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, a U.S. government-funded media organization. The horrible treatment that caused such catastrophic consequences is also part of the third crack in the Russian military's perceived strength, the sheer lack of battlefield tactics and strategic foresight. So far, the only tactic the Russian forces have heavily relied on was the infamous meat grinder strategy. This strategy is exactly what it sounds like. Ill-prepared and ill-equipped troops are sent en masse into combat to overwhelm the Ukrainian front lines. There's no regard for strategic objectives, the sheer unfiltered aggression akin to feeding soldiers directly into the relentless meat grinder of battle. At first glance, this approach can make the Russian army appear formidable in its unyielding push forward. But upon closer inspection, it becomes clear this army is virtually gaining no ground while suffering devastating losses. A similar approach can be seen across all the other theaters. It seems that Russia is hell-bent on completely obliterating Ukraine, but in reality, it's only eroding its military strength. Military equipment loss. Russia's military has suffered devastating losses, further revealing its weakness. According to a July 16th report by Ukraine's armed forces, Russia has lost 8,227 tanks, 15,962 armored vehicles, 20,680 vehicles, and fuel tanks, 15,368 artillery systems, 1,119 multiple launch rocket systems, 892 air defense systems, 361 airplanes, 326 helicopters, 1,193 drones, 28 ships, and 1 submarine. These losses reflect the inadequacy of Russia's military, despite initially overwhelming numbers of equipment. For example, Russia's Kamov Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter, once hailed as highly capable, has been downed over 80 times by Ukrainian forces, half of Russia's fleet. This highlights the failure of Russia's equipment, especially when compared to Western alternatives. The destruction of these helicopters led retired U.S. Army General Ben Hodges to question the competence of the entire Russian military, noting that the pilot skills were lacking. This failure also extends to Russia's leadership, which is marked by chaos, dysfunction, and corruption, compounding the military's struggles. Corruption issue. Call it what you will, any of those words best capture the state of Russian military leadership today. Although truthfully, this has always been the case with the Russian top brass, the invasion of showed just how rotten the core of the Russian military hierarchy truly is. The event that single-handedly proved this was the firing of Sergei Shoigu, who held the position of Russian defense minister for 12 years. Though this move was anticipated for some time, it was still shocking given how close Shoigu was to Putin. So why did Putin decide to boot his longtime confidant? Well, there are a few possible reasons for this highly consequential decision, including the overall poor performance of the Russian military in Ukraine and his feud with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the late head of the Wagner Group, which culminated in the infamous June 2023 Wagner Rebellion. However, the primary reason why Shoigu had to go was his reported involvement in embezzlement schemes. As The Diplomat, an international online magazine covering politics in the Indo-Pacific region, puts it, the present-day weakness also shows what happens when you let one person, Sergei Shoigu, steal most of the defense budget. So, if the one person whose job it is to ensure military readiness and capability only cares about lining his own pockets, how strong can that military truly be? The answer is painfully clear: not strong at all. Shoigu's departure isn't just a change in leadership. It's an indictment of a system riddled with corruption and incompetence, a system that has failed its soldiers and its nation. Defense industry. Russia's military is weakened by its failing state-run defense industry, a relic of Soviet power now plagued by corruption and inefficiency. Once a symbol of strength, it now struggles to produce the advanced equipment needed for modern warfare. While recent production increases in artillery, missiles, and drones may bolster numbers, they cannot compensate for years of neglect. Much of the equipment used is outdated, with the industry cannibalizing Soviet-era stock to meet demand. This also highlights the military's weaknesses, with poorly trained, inadequately equipped troops lacking morale. Despite boasting of 2,100 tanks produced in 2023, most are outdated and refurbished, with only 520 new tanks built. These outdated stocks are expected to last only until mid-2025, further exposing the Russian military's vulnerabilities. To make matters worse, Russia relies on imports from North Korea, Iran, and China, eroding its self-sufficiency. This creates a fundamental crisis in Russia's defense capability. Ultimately, the Russian military's deep-rooted flaws in corruption, outdated equipment, and reliance on imports highlight that its failure in Ukraine was inevitable. The ancients also said, "Do not underestimate the enemy. Even though Russia has revealed those fatal weaknesses, you still cannot underestimate that paper tiger." And what do you think? Could this be the door that opens for Ukraine to end the war? Please leave your share below in the comments. And thank you for watching. See you in the next video.